So
Hey, Fed Heads. Welcome back to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is episode number 152, the Partagas Serie D 4. We're going to be smoking this tonight, pairing it with a couple of delicious spirits. So sit down, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a cigar, and let's do this. All right, Fed Heads, we're back. I'm your host, Trip. This is Sharing Our Pairings. We're broadcast around the world on the Armed Forces Radio Network, live on Facebook, available as a podcast, or on the classic YouTubes. I'm here with what used to be my faithful co-host, John, the Cigar Surgeon McTavish. John, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, brother. How you doing? I'm sitting in the sun, enjoying a nice smoky Habanos. I got, the Cuban flag behind me, which I'm sure is going to draw some ire and comments from the industry. I'm ready to step back in the saddle, as it were, and get my drink on.
Yeah, and I should mention, Dennis and I did have an episode planned for tonight, but Dennis had a family emergency that he had to leave for. So unfortunately, we had to can that episode. We're actually going to do a non-alcoholic episode, which I thought would have been cool. We're going to do like bottled coffee, but I also realized that we should probably make that a morning show.
I some of the funner shows we've done over the years in Sharing Our Pairings, the soda pop, tea, coffee, have been a lot of fun. Like you would think that, doing those kind of non-alcoholic shows would be, it makes for a different after dark sort of interaction, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I could see how that could be different. And I always forget to mention at the top of the show, of course, John is joining us from Developing Palates.
I'm currently developing my palate.
How's the palate developing over there going?
It's good, man. We kicked off our beer reviews. If you've visited Developing Palates, we've been doing beer reviews for a few weeks now, and soon to be kicking off, spoilers, some scotch, some spirit reviews.
Yeah.
I don't think gin is going to be on my list, but I'm happy to review all the different spirits out there and, develop my palate as much as possible.
Speaking of gin, we had Boofy on last week. I don't know if you watched it. He told me that a distillery that I've had their whiskey on the show several times, called Big Bottom Distilling. He revealed that they make his gin, and they were like, I used to live like a mile down the road from them, it's just like, a small world.
It's crazy. Good for him.
But let's get on to talking about this thing. So this is the Partagas. We got a lot of history to talk about with Partagas. I finally did some research on Partagas. Man, my colors are all weird. I gotta fix that.
Wacky lighting.
Yeah, I got wacky lighting. Actually, that's what it is. I do have different lighting than I used to, so I think that I need to adjust the colors a little bit because they oversaturate now.
You got 6,500K, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there we go. Partagas has a very interesting history that I wasn't aware of. So why don't we talk about that a little bit? I know you're a little better at the history aspect than I am. So I'll let you kick it off. I'll fill in any blanks.
So first of all, it's kind of funny because obviously I'm a cigar nerd and I've been in cigar media for, 7 years now, 8 years, something like that.
It's been a bit.
And now I'm in the retail biz. And what I found really interesting is that obviously I'm a nerd and I'm a boutique nerd. But when it comes to Habanos, especially with the sort of crowd that I roll with, I really would classify myself as an amateur because the average Habanos guy that I hang with, I would describe as the hardest of the hardcore non-Cuban dudes. So, and I mean crazy stuff. Like, they can tell you what factory this particular year's production came from. They know the farms. They know good crops, bad crops. They memorize box codes, just insane stuff.
I know a lot of guys who memorize box codes, and they'll be like, they can hand you a cigar and be like, oh, that's from box code blah. And they can tell you what specifically, the flavor notes are that are only in that box code.
Yeah, it's nuts. Right. So, starting at the top, Partagas PSD number 4, it's 50 ring gauge and 124 science millimeters. And that's because, of course, Cuba uses the metric system like most free countries. No, not free, but most countries in the world use the metric system. So it's roughly 4.9 inches. I think it actually works out to 4.93. So it's kind of one of those weird, Robustos that's actually shorter than 5 inches, which you don't really run into a lot. For us here in Canada, it is actually one of 2 sort of best-selling cigars in the Habanos portfolio. So, a lot of people think Cohiba, but Partagas and the Monty number 4, those are kind of your money makers. Like those are the cigars that people gravitate towards Habanos at the right price, right size, good flavor profile, pretty approachable for most people. So talking about Partagas, of course, they were established in 1827. The factory was actually. Go ahead.
Wait, when were they established?
1827.
Really? Okay. So the information that I read said they were founded in 1845, but that may have just been talking about the factory.
That's right. Yeah. So the factory was built in 1845. Of course, you can still visit it, but you can't actually tour it because it's been a mess for longer than I've been going to Cuba, so more than 10 years. And they've actually built a new factory, which is actually the old factory for El Rey de Mundo, and that was built in 2016. It's supposedly nice. I haven't had an opportunity to tour it, but you can go by the old Partagas factory, and of course, that's kind of our favorite shop to hang out because there is a La Casa del Habano that is next to the Partagas shop, or the Partagas factory, the old Partagas factory, and it is, one of our favorite places to hang out. They've got a nice smoking room, et cetera, et cetera. This PSD number 4 originally produced from the 1930s to 1960s, and then, Cuba being Cuba, they discontinued it, and then they reintroduced it in 1975. So it's not actually the longest continuous produced Habanos cigar, but it hasn't really changed other than some minor band changes over the years. So the only thing that really I would say has changed is that up until 2007, you could only get it in 25 count box, and they only really introduced the 10 count boxes in 2007. I think partially because if you start looking at the international markets like Canada, Europe, with the cost, I can tell you it's really tough to get somebody to drop $800 on a 25 count. So much easier to get them to drop, a couple $100 on a 10 count.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing was, of course, the namesake, named after a gentleman from the Catalan, Don Jaime Partagas y Ravelo. And,
I have some interesting facts about him.
That's very good.
So this is the part that I found interesting about the history of Partagas. So Don Jaime founded it in, was it 1927?
Yeah.
And then in
1827.
In 1868, he was actually murdered on one of the plantations. And he was murdered by a guy who suspected him of having an affair with his wife.
That's just how they do in Cuba. I don't know why the guy got his jimmies rustled. That's just Cuba.
Yeah. So he passed it on to his son, Jose, I think his name was. Yeah, Jose. And he actually ended up selling the business. There's no definite year when this happened. And the really interesting thing that I find is he sold it to a guy named Jose A. Banques, which, if you've ever been to a mall in the U.S., you've seen Joseph A. Banks. Yep. And I was like, whoa, is that the same person? Because that's Spanish
very close.
Joseph A. Bank. Yep. They're not the same person, but I thought it was really interesting. In 1899, he brought in a partner named Ramon Cifuentes Llano. Mm-hmm. And that's why, so sometimes you'll see Partagas y Cifuentes, especially on some of the General. Are they General or they're General? Some of the General cigars from Partagas. And about a year later, he bought up all the shares from Banques. So he ended up as sole owner. Then, unfortunately, near the end of his life, in 1960, the government came in and seized the factory, as they did with 15 others. And that's just the way things go when you live in a communist country, I guess.
Yeah. And I assume we're probably going to keep it politics-free because there's a lot of, obviously, ex-Cuban people in the industry that we...
of course.
And they have a lot of strong feelings, understandably. But, here to talk about the cigars. Now, one of the things I didn't mention is the Partagas, because, of course, the thing with Habanos is that, unlike non-Cubans, there's a real tradition of aging the cigars. Partially, I think, because the tobacco isn't, fermented as long as non-Cuban cigars. So you get a lot more character letting the cigar sit for, 3, 5, 10, 15, however many years. So I'm actually smoking a Partagas Serie D number 4, and I had to look it up because I didn't have the box code down, from December of 2012.
Ooh, that's an oldie.
I've only got 2 left. This is one of the 2 I've left.
I was telling John before the show, I believe mine is either 2015 or 2016, though I'm not sure. I got this in a one of those. Are they 3-packs or 4-packs?
Oh yeah. Well, softies.
Pick them up at an airport.
Yep.
So
this is kind of. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask what your tasting notes of the cigar are so far.
See, we're back in sync. I never left the show because I was going to say, this is kind of the classic flavor profile that I associate with Partagas. It's got a little bit of hay, a little bit of cocoa, a little bit of cedar. And I know this is sort of classified in the Habanos world as being a full-bodied cigar. Obviously, for me, full-bodied takes on a different connotation when we're talking about Habanos versus non-Habanos. So this is definitely full body for Habanos, but for my palate, I would describe this as solidly medium.
Absolutely.
Solidly medium flavors. And of course, the big thing when you've got a cigar that's aged like this and it's elegant, all the flavors are kind of in together. You get no sharp transitions. You get no one flavor standing out. I get a lot of, as the cigar's kind of established itself, and look at that, actual good burn.
Mine got a little wonky, but it's doing pretty good.
Yeah. I've got like that.
We should probably talk about this thing.
Oh yeah.
I got a little water spot.
Got a water spot.
You'll see those. If you see these on your cigars, I've seen a lot of people call them mold, which they're obviously not. It's basically where a drop of water formed during fermentation, and they're that threw me off. It's where a drop of water forms on the leaf, and basically it keeps that piece from fermenting, or in some cases like this, it kind of causes it to rot a little bit. So that little spot is kind of dry rotted almost.
And you sometimes you'll see it as yellow. Sometimes more often, especially on Habanos, you'll see it as green. It'll come through as almost a fluorescent green. And I think that's where people start to think it's mold because they see that green and they automatically assume mold. But most of the mold. Most of the plume I see on cigars is actually just white mold. I've never seen green mold on cigars before.
Yeah, I have seen green mold on cigars, but it's when it's like there's no question that it's mold. Like they've been in standing water almost for years. That
sounds like some tasty plume.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody on Facebook would love that. Mm-hmm. But the point is that water spots aren't dangerous. They're not going to hurt your cigar. They're just a result of the lack of attention to detail that sometimes can go into these Habanos.
I've seen them on non-Cubans too. It just happens.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually it happens when they're trying to kind of rush through fermentation a little too fast. They end up not noticing that there's too much moisture. The
fermentation process, as we like to call it.
Yeah, when the fermentation juices start building up.
That's right. So, like I said, this is kind of, like I said, one of the 2 sort of mainstay. I don't know if a lot of people out there know Partagas brands very well, but every year in November, there's a Partagas festival. There's sort of 2 big festivals in Cuba. There's Partagas Festival, which is November, and it's kind of a consumer festival, and then you get the Habanos Festival in February, which I have not ever been invited to. And I have to say, as the general manager for a chain of 18 stores, I'm actually starting to get a little offended that I haven't been invited. Like, I don't know if I'd go, but I'm on the wall, the famous wall in the Partagas store. So I feel like if I'm on the wall and I'm a big retailer, you're inviting Charlie, but you're not going to invite me.
You should talk to your distributor about that.
Right?
They can get you in. All right, so let's we got to take a break first, but then we'll get back and we'll start talking about our booze. So this segment is brought to you by the Cigar Federation store. Go to store.cigarfederation.com, sign up for the Cigar of the Month, get a bunch of cool stuff, or, if they have a cigar you like, you can get 10% off by signing up for Cigar Federation.
Boom.
All right. I'm talking about my first one, which is a weird first choice. But based on my other choices, I think I've chosen the right order. My first one is Ardbeg 10.
That is a weird choice, my friend.
So I chose it because Ardbeg, even though it's got a lot of smoke, it's got a lot of flavor, but it's fairly delicate on the palate for what it is. For an Isla, it's fairly delicate. Like it's not like Lafroig or Ugadal where it like takes over your palate.
Yeah.
It's a little more nuanced, even though it's still intensely smoky.
Yeah, you don't get the same sherry character as you would with some of the other expressions from Ardbeg either.
Yeah, and I'm coming up on some sherry, dog.
Oh,
we'll get to some sherry.
We went different directions tonight.
Ardbeg is located on the southern coast of Islay. They started producing whiskey in 1798, and they weren't commercially licensed until 1815.
Quick little comment.
Go for it.
So, as I learned in my tasting last night with George Grant of Glenfarclas, a lot of these distilleries have an official sort of founded date. The truth of the matter is, a lot of them were probably producing whiskey for as many as 20 or 30 years prior to their sort of founding date, because they were doing a lot of illicit whiskey distilling, because, you know, Scots don't like to pay taxes. I mean, who does? So, anyways, throwing that out there.
Well, and at that point, I wouldn't be surprised if their governments weren't, like in the 1700s, man, I wouldn't be surprised if their governments weren't sophisticated enough to charge people taxes and give out liquor licenses and stuff like that.
I don't think there's a lot of inspection going on in the Isle of Islay in 1796.
Exactly. Let me see. They were closed from 1981 to 1989, and they started producing again in 1989, but they didn't go into full production until 1997 when they were purchased by Glenmorangie, who was then purchased by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. I hate that name is so long. I wish they would just call it like
LV something.
LVMH or something.
Yeah.
They've got one wash and one spirit still. They make about 1.25 million liters or 330,000 Freedom gallons.
So I have a little bit of comments to share.
Go for it.
So the information I had on the distillery used to be one wash, one spirit. Apparently they upgraded previously to two wash and two spirit.
Oh, interesting.
And in my Ardbeg tasting, I did a bunch of Ardbeg tastings for Ardbeg Day and asked some pointed questions. And they're going to be upgrading they're going to double their capacity. So they're going to do four. And now thinking about that, I wonder if I've got that wrong. I wonder if they're going to two wash, two spirit. But I swore it was four wash, four spirit. Basically, they're going to double their capacity. And
still, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of capacity. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have it in my notes that it won the World Whiskey Bible, or the Whiskey Bible World Whiskey of the Year in 2008. But as we've talked about before,
I mean, if you care about anything Jim Murray says, sure.
Yeah, that's kind of like to me, it has a little bit less credibility than like Cigar Aficionado's top 25. Mm-hmm. Like, if something's number one for Cigar Aficionado, that means a group of people there agreed that it should be number one. There's just one guy saying this is the best thing that I've had. One
very opinionated guy.
I mean, yeah, it could have been the fish sandwich he had for lunch made it better that day or something. It's 46% ABV, clocks in around 65 ppm of peat, which is considered heavily peated. But as we've discussed before, there is a wide range above that in heavily
very wide
peated.
Range.
Like lightly peated, there's unpeated, lightly peated, heavily peated. And heavily peated is like 100 times wider of a range than any of the others.
And I've had some 25, 30 ppm whiskeys that taste peatier than the Ardbeg 10.
Absolutely. It's not truly an indication of how peaty it's going to taste. Mm-hmm. And a bottle of this runs right around $50 in most places. Probably a little less if you're not in my state.
Nice. So I'm going with something controversial. You'll find out why. It's Suntory. I do like Suntory whiskey. And because the Habanos in general tend to be, like I said, what I would call delicate compared to the wider spectrum of cigars. Mm-hmm. Now, these are, like I said, medium-bodied. So they will, I believe the Partagas is going to stand up to a lot of pairings, but I wanted to start out with something really delicate, which is why I went with the Toki. So Suntory, of course, one of the first commercially built, or however you want to describe that, distilleries in Japan for whiskey, founded by Shinjiro Tori in 1923 with the Yamazaki distillery. Toki comes in at 43%. If you've watched the show in the past, you know that's most Japanese whiskey comes in at 43%. That's kind of their magic number. Yep. It's a blend, so it is a blended whiskey. Now, you notice on there, they don't say blended malt. They don't say so. And there's some question as to, is it? So my understanding is it's a blend of single malt and grain. So it's a little bit of grain.
Understanding.
Yeah. So you've got some single malt from Hakushu, some single malt from Yamazaki, and then you've got some grain whiskey from the Cheetah Distillery. They say that the tasting notes are grapefruit, green grapes, peppermint, thyme. So a lot of really sort of bright green flavors. And, you know, in Japanese fashion, they say you can drink it straight, or they also recommend having it as a cocktail or a highball. So this is, you can see the color. It's quite light, very, very light. And very light on the palate. I'm going to take some sippies here and see if I can get some tasting notes while you talk about your tasting.
All right. So the Ardbeg, let me take another sippy because I was busy listening.
I liked it.
I love Ardbeg. I think it's just
what's not to love?
Such a good whiskey. Like a lot of people can't get over the peat, but to me, it's not too aggressive for me.
Yeah.
But it's got like this. Yeah, it's got this really nice balance because it starts off with this fairly intense sweetness that reminds me kind of like a stone fruit, I guess, like peach or something like that, apricot. And then it's got like some honey and some almost floral characteristics, and then it finishes just smoky. And that smoke just kind of sits on your palate for a while. And I find that it covers up the brighter notes in the cigar, but it amps up the kind of lower end, earthier, leatherier flavors in the cigar.
So we're at the opposite ends of the spectrum with our tasting because this Toki is, like I said, and I mean the whole point of making a blended whiskey is, you know, to make it quote unquote easy drinking. Very, you know, for lack of a better description, light on the body, not overly intense. And that's kind of where I wanted to start tonight. I didn't want to run over the cigar. I wanted to kind of accent the cigar. But the whiskey does stand up. It's not being run over. It is very green. You know, I wouldn't say it's apple, and I wouldn't say grapefruit. Grapefruit, I think, is too intense for this. I would say green grape is a very accurate description. So if you imagine water being run through green grape and that sort of fresh green grape flavor, that's a very good descriptor of this whiskey. So it's a very clean spirit. Keeps my palate very fresh, and as a result, I sort of get a lot more of that sort of cocoa and cedar off the cigar, and that's really where the cigar is being highlighted. So you're getting the sort of heavier, earthy tones, and I'm getting the sort of sweeter, high notes, if you will, off the flavor profile here.
The thing for me with Toki, we were talking a little bit earlier about, I just don't care for Toki. I've only had it a couple times. But every time
I get it. You're racist. It's okay. It
reminds me of what I don't think it exists anymore. I know it did for a little while, but it reminds me of light whiskey, which is kind of where you cut whiskey with vodka, so you're not cutting the alcohol, but you're cutting the flavor.
Yeah.
And that's what it reminds me of. Because it's so lightly flavored. I've had a couple other. Actually, I was talking about it last week, maybe the week before. It was from Oregon Spirits called Whippersnapper, and it was an Oregon-made whiskey. It was, but it was the same kind of like. For me, it just didn't have enough body for me to enjoy drinking it.
It's the Connecticut shade of whiskeys. Like
that's the perfect way of describing it.
Yeah, it's subtle, it's nuanced, it's light, it's delicate. You know, you're not getting Ardbeg-like flavors. You do have to reach for it, but you know, this is sort of the quote unquote everyman's whiskey because it's not going to blow out your palate and everyone can drink this.
I could see it working really well with a non-whiskey forward kind of cocktail. One where you're kind of building other flavors on top of the whiskey. I feel like it could work really well in something like that.
Yeah, I think they recommend sparkling water or soda water with it. And I think maybe the bubbles in the soda water kind of serve to accent some of the flavors. But my concern with a whiskey this light and this delicate is that what ended up happening is you kind of blow out any unique qualities within that whiskey. Like you wouldn't be able to taste some of those natures. But again, you know, drink what you want, how you want. If it's your bottle, if it's your pour, who am I to tell you not to drink it? But for me, you know, if I'm buying a whiskey like this, I'm drinking it straight.
Yeah, me too. And I think the problem for me is that there aren't better Japanese whiskeys in that price point. because it's priced way under every other Japanese whiskey out there.
Yeah, it's like I think I picked it up for $38 or something, which, for any kind of whiskey, $38 is good. Like I don't even think you can get a lot of the Irish whiskey for that. Like a Jameson's, I think comes in at $39 or $40.
Wow,
so,
really?
Yeah.
Jameson's is a lot cheaper here. I think Jameson is about $20 here.
Yeah, see, we have basically a flat tax on our whiskey. So why it's really good is you can get like really high end whiskey for like when we were because like I say we had the tasting last night with George Grant of Glenfarclas, and we were telling him some of the prices of his old whiskeys in Alberta, and he's like, "What? It's how much?" It's like, "Does that seem high?" He's like, "No, that seems about $300 too inexpensive." Like, well, because we have basically a capped alcohol tax, so really good if you've got single malt whiskey, but obviously really bad if you have because I think we've talked about the Florida Kenya, and Florida Kenya is like hella expensive here. Like I think the 18-year-old is like $58 or $55, and it's like oh no, pardon me, not the 18-year-old, the 12-year-old. And it's like
wow.
I'm not paying $50 for 12-year-old Florida Kenya. Like that's crazy talk. And I think the 18 is like $65, something like that. So,
oof.
Yeah, it's not good for inexpensive spirits, unfortunately.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here, I think the Toki's around like 30 or 35, and then basically every other Japanese is above 50. But there's a lot of like blended scotches that you can get that I think are comparable to Toki, or better, that are in the same price range.
Compass Box or Kilhoman's good. I don't know how Kilhoman's priced out of the market, but those are all like, what I would classify as sort of high-end blended single malts.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm going to move on to my next pairing here. This one, I think I overestimated. I think you were right. I think I went a little too far in the wrong direction with my pairings here, so I think I'm going to regret these. But my next one comes to me from Kentucky. This is Eagle Rare.
Oh, so good.
Eagle Rare, I talked about it a couple weeks ago, but I'll talk about it a little bit again, just to go over the highlights. It's distilled and distributed by Buffalo Trace. The Eagle Rare brand was introduced in 1975, and it was originally introduced by Seagram when it was a 101 proof, non-single barrel, 10-year straight Kentucky bourbon.
Boy, I bet that was good.
In 89, Sazerac purchased it and discontinued the 101 10-year non-single barrel in 2005. In 2005, they switched to a single barrel, and then I don't have it in my notes. I think it was in 2009 or 2011 when they took the single barrel statement off of it. And very strangely, like you'll see here, it's got the giant Eagle Rare logo. It says Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's got the giant eagle. But you wouldn't know it was 10 years old unless you looked right there.
That's an odd packaging choice, right?
It really is. And the reason that they took the single barrel off is not because it's no longer single barrel. It's because they used to hand bottle it, which basically means that they are, I don't know exactly how hand bottling works, but attaching some sort of device to the cask, and then they're basically just filling each bottle.
Yeah.
But now they've got an automated bottling system where basically they dump a cask in one end and a bunch of bottles come out.
Oh. So they can't guarantee it's single barrel.
Exactly. They're not flushing those lines in between. So what you're drinking is most likely single barrel, but there's a possibility of a few drops from a different barrel being in there. So they had to take that off for legal purposes. That's why
liquor laws exist, to protect the consumer from any sort of intended or unintended fraud.
Yeah, and it's bottled at 45%, which is 90 proof. So it's lost a little bit of heat from where it originally was, but I think it stands up. I love this. And I love Eagle Rare. Like for a 10-year-old essentially single barrel whiskey, it's about $30 here, and it's available all year round. Like I've heard of places where it's impossible to buy, where it's apparently an allocated product, so like, each distributor only gets so much. Yeah. But for us, I don't know why it works out this way, but it's pretty readily available here. I've never seen a store that was sold out of it that carried it.
See, that's funny because I mean, we get a fair selection of bourbon up here, and a lot of times we get allotment that like even some places in the States don't get.
Mhm.
But I'd have to check, but I swear that our price on the Eagle Rare is like closer to $60, which is odd because like sometimes with Elijah Craig and Bullet and some of the other sort of mainstay stuff, our price is kind of right in line with the States, but Eagle Rare is a lot more expensive here.
This is about the same price as the regular Bullet for me. Which, you know, the regular Bullet is no age statement.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to take a couple sips of this, see how it pairs with my Partagas.
Copy that.
Talk about your next.
Man, tell you what, I'd be putting that 10-year age statement front and center in that bottle because, you know.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Doesn't make any sense to me either. So going, you know, can't have a Cuban cigar and not have Cuban product. Havana Club, Añejo. And you featured this a number of times. This is the old school bottle. This is before they changed the packaging. This goes to show.
Got an empty bottle right here.
Goes to show how often I go down to Cuba and pick up bottles. I don't buy Havana Club 7 here because, God, why would I pay Canadian prices when I can buy a bottle down there for like 9 kook and drink it nonstop, essentially, till my liver cries out in pain. But, you know, it's got that nice dark amber color. Now, the interesting thing about Havana Club, you know, Cuba does maintain the tradition of age statements. So, of course, like the age statement in most liquors is supposed to be, it's the minimum age of rum. So in this case, 7. But they say that, you know, a lot of cases it takes 14 years to craft a bottle. So that should tell you the kind of age statement of different rums that's going into it. And, you know, like I said, you've talked about it many times in the show. And to me, the sort of definitive point of the 7 is, first of all, it's inexpensive, which is great. It's a solid rum. And, you know, if you're a rum snob like me, you can drink it straight. Or if you're just a normal guy, you can have a Cuba Libre and you can put Coke in it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It makes a hell of a mixed drink.
Yeah, it's not like putting Ronzacapa or something in a Cuba Libre where you're using something that's specifically intended to be drank straight and you're paying for that. I mean, it's so reasonable that I don't feel bad when I make a Cuba Libre with it. Yeah,
I mean, it is, you know, especially for Cuba, it's intended to be sipped by itself, but it makes a hell of a mojito. Like any kind of rum-based drink, I would go for Havana Club 7 over any other rum I have, partially because, you know, what kind of animal would I be putting Florida Kenya 12 in Centenario in a mixed drink? But, you know, I am a snob, and I think white rum is a travesty. You know, so, you know, even when it comes to mixed drinks, I'm a bit of a snob. I'd rather use a really nice 7-year. You know, and and the other thing I guess to comment on is, because I've talked about it in the past about agricultural rum versus industrial rum. Most big factories that produce rum do industrial rum because the molasses is a byproduct of the sugar that's produced from sugarcane. So essentially, the molasses is an off product, as it were, and it really is just a cost factor, and it you know, it doesn't really mean anything because 90% of the world's rum is made from molasses. But the Havana Club 7 is a industrial rum, and there's nothing wrong with it. It tastes great. You know, I'll crush bottles of this all day long and twice on Sunday, and I'm gonna keep having some more sips and let you talk about how your second pairing of the night's going.
I think it was last week that Dennis and I were talking about agricultural rum, and it's when you taste agricultural and industrial side by side, you notice a difference.
Oh yeah, big.
But it's really not a difference of flavor; it's a difference of levels of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Like you taste more under the surface in agricultural rum.
Yeah, and I mean, to coin a phrase in a thing that I'm not really comfortable with, which is music, I would say that agricultural rum is like a vinyl record. You've got these really great highs and these really great lows in this big range. With industrial rum, you've got the same flavors. They're just kind of compressed down into, you know, the center. So, you know, I'll drink industrial rum. I mean, again, 90% of the world's production of rum is industrial, so whatever. But, you know, I do have bottles of agricole rum because it's different. And I am anything but a collector of beverages and spirits that taste different than what can be readily found. So, you know,
yeah. So I find it interesting with the Eagle Rare. I mean, like I was saying before, Eagle Rare is just a fantastic bourbon. Mm-hmm. It's got a ton of flavor. It reminds me a lot of Elijah Craig. It's a little less sweet and a little more kind of spice forward.
Spicy, yeah.
And And I'm blown away by this. I keep having to go back to it because it actually brings out more spice in the cigar, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting it to cover up the moderate amount of spice that's there.
Mm-hmm. So, again, the Havana Club 7's been talked to death in the show, but it's kind of that point where you start to get into the sort of highfalutin end of rum, where you get the sort of complex rum notes. It's not overly sweet. You get a lot more fruity notes, like bright fruity notes like pineapple and mango and that kind of thing. But there is still that sort of underneath that, there is still a hint of that sort of young quality you might get off like a 3-year rum. But like I'm sure that there's quite a bit of 10 or 12 or even 14-year rum in this, because it's just, for a 7-year rum, it's extremely elegant. And I can't really think of a lot of 7-year-old rums, like even Florida Canyon, which I love. For me, the starting point is, because I'm a Philistine, the starting point is the 12-year, because I just can't. I taste too much of that character in the younger whiskeys, the younger rum.
Yeah, with the Florida Canyon 7, it's so aggressive.
Very aggressive.
Havana Club is just the opposite of that. It's not aggressive at all. It's very nuanced.
And it's cheap, which speaks to my Scottish nature. I love cheap things that taste good. If I can find a bargain and it involves spirits, that is right up my alley.
Yeah, what is it in Cuba? Like, I don't know, $10 or $12 a bottle?
Not even. I think most of the time it's like, it's roughly that. I was going to say it's like 8 or 9 kook, but 10 or 12 kook is at that point like $10 for a bottle of rum. And like, I don't have to feel bad if I crush half the bottle that night, which, more often than not I do. Go through 2 bottles in a couple days stay in Cuba, and then come back with 2 bottles in your suitcase. Like, you spent less than $50. Like, I don't know anywhere you can drink for that cheap when you're talking like straight rum and an entire bottle of rum. Like, any kind of bottle service at any place in the world, you're looking at $50 to start, and you're not getting
except Nicaragua.
Except Nicaragua.
I'm still trying to dissect how the Eagle Rare goes with it.
So I'm really surprised that, first of all, the Eagle Rare is not aggressively running over the PSD number 4. That's really cool, because bourbon was. I thought about bourbon tonight, but I was really worried about that spicy character of bourbon kind of just stampeding over the character of the cigar.
Yeah, and I mean the spicy character is there, but it really doesn't impact the cigar as much as I expected it to. My next one, I think, is gonna overrun the cigar.
You and me both, my friend.
So my next one is Aberlour Abanad. Am I saying that right, John?
Oh my God! You went to the sherriest of sherry ends of whiskey.
Yeah, I did. I mean, maybe second most sherry. I had it out here before because I was drinking it last week and I left it out here. But I thought about going with Ohishi, but I figured that was even way too much sherry for it. So Aberlour, let me get to my notes. Aberlour has a really weird and interesting history that's very hard to decode. The original Aberlour distillery was built in 1826 and burned down in 1879. And from all my research, that was actually not the same Aberlour company. Yeah. It had the same name, but then in 1879, a new distillery was built at a different location that's the actual Aberlour that's still around today, which burned down less than 20 years later in 1898. And I think that was the last major fire that they had as far as my research.
I mean, thank goodness, because how many distillery fires do you have to have before you catch on that, take care of your malts, because they'll burn.
I mean, there have been, like, if you're not familiar, like, just Google distillery fire. Like, almost every major distillery has burned to the ground at some point or another.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable how many
volatile liquids and grains don't mix well.
One of the major ones in the U.S. was Elijah Craig. They lost pretty much everything in like the late 90s, I think it was.
And they lost all their stock too, which is really the tragic part. I mean, the distillery is one thing, but God, you lose all that old stock. That's sad.
Yeah. most of their warehouse burnt down in that, which is really bad. So Aberlour Abenad is a. So it's interesting because it might have been the last time you were on the show. No, it was. I think you might have been watching the show. We were talking about single cask scotches, which are extremely rare. Yes. Most of the time, the only time you're going to get a single cask is from a bottler, like Signatory or
Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, right, or like all the different various independent bottlers.
That's mostly when you get a single cask bottling. This is actually single cask, but it's not. They didn't all start in the same cask. They all went straight from a cask to the bottle, but they were married together. They married together whiskeys between 5 and 25 years, they say, and then they finished those in Spanish oak Oloroso sherry butts, and then that is what is bottled at cask strength in a single cask bottling. This particular bottling is 60.8. This is batch number 61.
Ooh, getting up there.
Yeah, and this one's actually, I think, like almost a year old.
Oh wow!
From when I was reading it on their website, I think they're almost to 70 now.
So I've got batch. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to take a couple sips while you talk about your next one.
Copy that. I've got batch 37 and 46, and it's remarkable just between those batches to taste it's a gigantic difference in flavor. But again, that's why I'm kind of that's why I like single cask whiskey.
And that's what makes it good.
Yeah, the more I drink single cask whiskey, the more I buy single cask whiskey because it's from a distillery that you know and love, and it's just a product that's unique to that distillery that you're never going to taste again. It's a one-off. So I also went with an aggressive choice tonight, and I had to look back to see if I'd ever paired this on the show, and I hadn't. So Glenfiddich, which, there's a lot of Glenfiddich releases out there, and I love pretty much all of them. This is something a little bit special. This is a 15 distillery edition. I'll talk a little bit about that and what that means, but, I'm not going to go into great detail about Glenfiddich because they're kind of one of the biggest distilleries in Scotland. They're a Speyside/Dufftown distillery. Founded in 1886. They use the Robbie Dew as their water source. They have just a astronomically huge 10 million liters of spirits a year, which I think is actually up to 12 million now, which is just under 3 million Freedom gallons, 2.64 million Freedom gallons. What makes the distillery edition kind of stand out is a lot of Glenfiddich product is bottled at the minimum ABV, and I'm not going to go into a big diatribe, but I'm not a big fan of doing the minimum by law. I like 43, 46. I know that I'm not the average whiskey drinker that they market to. I know that there's a lot of issues that people put ice in their whiskey and then it gets cloudy and they throw a conniption, so there's chill filtration. This is not chill filtered, so all the original proteins and chemicals and whatnot that come off the barrel are in this whiskey, and that's to me how it should be. If you add whiskey or add ice to your whiskey and you complain about the cloudiness, then suck it up, princess, because
and stop adding ice to it.
Stop adding ice to it. It's, to me, a lot of that oaky wood character that comes along with that process. By chill filtering it out, you're getting rid of some of the character of the whiskey, and for me, I think that's garbage. So all that said, it's 51% ABV, so it's quite a bit higher than most Glenfiddichs. It is a vatting of different casks, but it's mostly ex-bourbon with some sherry. So I don't know what the ratio is, but I guess it's like 70% to 30%. But it's huge. I mean, you nose this, and to me, it's just immediately the biggest bourbon, vanilla pears and peaches. Like, it's just so huge off the nose, and I don't know how this is going to pair tonight, because that's really, really big for this cigar. But I'm going to taste some sips and try it out. I think we're up against a station break. Yeah.
We sure are. I was about to get to that. This segment is brought to you by our friends over at Drew Estate. They good.
They're good.
Wearing my Pappy Van Winkle hat, which is
that's a very good.
It's a very good tie-in with the show because they've got a cigar that's specifically meant to pair with a liquor that I've never had before. But didn't
you have it down on Safari?
No, I wasn't there that year. That was the year before I went.
That was the wrong year to miss.
I know. But those Pappy Van Winkle cigars are fantastic. I love
straight hot fire. Yeah.
Yeah, straight hot fire. And if you can get your hands on those Lonsdales, those things are amazing.
Yeah, I lit up Underground Corona Viva a few days ago because I can, and man, I'm so excited that the number 9 is in a Corona Viva format now, because that Undercrown in a Corona, the Undercrown Maduro as they call it now, in a Corona Viva is just like, it is my jam. It is just the maximum flavor you can get out of an Undercrown in a format that you can have 2 in a night and not feel bad about it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying that Corona Viva. I got one of the. So I was telling Surgeon before the show, I got this hat from Fabian. He was at an event here last month.
Dirty Fabian.
And he also hooked us up with one of the. So you know how at Drew Estate events they give away usually they give away a single cigar if you have the Drew Dip app or the Drew Diplomat app.
Unless you're Canadian, then you get
unless
nothing.
You're Canadian and you're not allowed to do that. But they give you one free cigar with your purchase, no matter what you buy, as long as it's something Drew Estate. They had 2 this time because they're kind of in the transition period where they're switching quarters because they do a different cigar every quarter. So it was the Hoy de Nicaragua Classico, the new version, which is in like a Lonsdale, and the T52 Corona Viva, which I'm so excited to smoke that.
Stop it! I didn't even know the T52 was in a Corona Viva.
I don't know how much I'm allowed to say, but I do believe that we can expect an announcement at IPCPR. I don't have any official confirmation of that. Like Fabian didn't really tell me, but I have a feeling that we're going to see those at the trade show this year, and that they'll be launching sometime shortly after that.
I'm not usually one to get my weasel on too hard at the show, but I got to tell you, I'll be getting my weasel on hardcore at the Drew Estate booth for both the number 9 Corona Viva, T52 Corona Viva. So, call me. Yeah,
I'm going to be disappointed if they don't have them because I'm really looking forward to weaseling 1 or 2 of those or more.
So excited. Anyways.
So I made a bad choice, John. I made a bad choice.
It's too spicy, right?
It's just got too much spice, too much flavor for this cigar, and it completely blows the cigar away. The cigar.
I could have warned you if I was a good friend, but I didn't. I was like, I'm just gonna let you jump in the hand grenade.
I mean, that's part of the show is experimenting, and sometimes experiments fail. So this time I'm gonna hang my head and say that whatever you do not pair a Abanad with with basically any Cuban cigar. I don't know if any Cuban could really stand up to it.
No, it's true, and obviously because I live in Canada where we can smoke Habanos, so it's just no big deal here. And obviously, I get the chance to pair an extensive amount of whiskey with an extensive amount of Cuban cigars. So I've done a lot of professional tasting at events and just on my own. The only sherried whiskey that I've ever found that will pair well with Habanos is a Glenlivet Nadura.
Oh boy.
The Nadura, because I think the Nadura has a lot of bourbon sweetness, it kind of walks right up to that line of where the sherry would start to run the cigar over, and then it just kind of steps back. And I think that's about as intense as you can get because, and that's why I was surprised about the bourbon, that the bourbon was running the cigar over, because I kind of thought it'd be along that same lines where it's just too spicy and too intense. But I'm really happy to hear that the Eagle Rare worked out. Yeah, the Eagle Rare is working a lot better. I've moved back to that now, so I'm checking to see how that pairs. How does that Glenfiddich pair with the cigar? It's good. I think in the same way that the Glenlivet Nadura kind of walks up to that line, I think this Glenfiddich Distillery Edition does the same thing. There's enough sort of bourbon character in there that it still doesn't run the cigar, but it is big. It's almost too big. Anything larger than this in terms of ABV body or strength, or a sherried body, I think would be far too much for Habanos. Within the wider cigar market, most Habanos kind of cap out at that medium strength level if you're used to smoking a lot of non-Cuban cigars as well. It's good. It's not great. I think a more bourbon-forward whiskey would be the way to go. And I was kind of looking through my cabinet to find something, and nothing really kind of came to me. So this is good. And again, I think the sort of key takeaway is that sherried whiskeys are kind of a no-go with a lot of Habanos cigars. You're just going to ruin the character of the cigar. And when you're spending $8 to $15 or whatever you're spending on a cigar, you kind of want the cigar to be the thing that's being highlighted, in my opinion.
The star of the show, yeah.
Yeah.
The sherry is just way too much for it.
Yeah.
It completely eliminates, like I was saying, the Ardbeg kind of eliminates some of the high notes of the cigar. This eliminates, if we're talking like music, to me, for some reason, works really well as an analogy for taste. And with that analogy, it completely eliminates everything from the high and mid section and leaves just like kind of earthiness on the palate. So it just kind of has that bitter earth, which. And
I mean, you went with like what I would classify as maybe the top 5 most sherry influenced whiskeys in the market.
Absolutely.
Right? Like it's crazy sherry. Springbank 15 Sherry Edition is hugely sherry. I think the Amrut Sherry Edition is intermediate sherry is hugely sherry. I mean, that's why I love the Abelar. But with a Habano cigar, probably not good.
Yeah, Jared Grillett says to pair it with rum. That's what I probably should have done. I didn't want to take the easy route and pair it with rum.
Yeah.
But
it's not called sharing your easy pairings.
Yeah. So yeah, the Aberlour just doesn't work. Not at all.
I know we got some time left in the show. Is there any audience questions, comments, or whatever that we could go to?
Let's see. Well, Jared Grillett also says he's signed into SigFed from the DR, so he wins.
Oh, that's right. He's been down there getting his DR head on. I've been seeing the Instagram posts.
I'm jealous of that. I wish I was back in the DR.
So say we all.
That's about it for the audience comments. When we were talking about blended Scotch, Evan Kirshner brought up Monkey Shoulder, as he always does.
Oh yeah, he rages on the Monkey Shoulder.
Oh yeah, he's a Monkey Shoulder guy. It's like a meme in this Facebook group for this whiskey centered YouTube channel. I'm part of this group, and I don't know how it happened, but somehow people in that group, like, Monkey Shoulder has just become a meme of itself, where they kind of pretend that it's the best whiskey out there, which is hilarious. But some people are real into Monkey Shoulder. It doesn't do much for me. I want to try Smoky Monkey though, but I've never seen a place that actually had it.
Yeah, Monkey Shoulder's all right. I mean, it's I think again, we talk about the sort of the greater market. Like the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about whiskey is 85% of the world drinks blended whiskey. Like that's what people consume. Interestingly enough, I learned a new fact that I did not know, and I'm going to share that with the audience today, and that is Taiwan bucks that trend.
Really?
More than 60% of the volume of consumption in Taiwan is single malt whiskey.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? So I don't know why I wasn't able to get a sort of a definitive answer from George Grant, but he said, in terms of money, Germany goes crazy over Glenfarclas, and I won't go into it tonight. There's a really cool reason for it. But in terms of money, Taiwan loves their single malts. They do not drink blended whiskey. So that's kind of cool. And it really there's really no place in the world except for maybe the province of Alberta. And even then, I think, our consumption of single malt is probably only about 25-30% maybe.
Yeah. I mean, that's why Johnny Walker is the best-selling Scotch out there, is because it's blended and just people like it.
Number one descriptor, it's smooth.
Yeah.
It's not a flavor, but that's what people like.
And I don't find Johnny Walker smooth at all. I find Johnny Walker a little harsh.
I'm not. I mean, don't want to go on a big Johnny Walker rant, but I like the black, and obviously I like the blue. I'm not rich, so I can't afford the blue, so I buy the green, and the
green's good.
Green's all right. I'm glad it's back.
Yeah.
Well, I'll drink some Monkey Shoulder. It's all right.
How are you finding the cigar at this point?
So I'm in the last third because I'm kind of really enjoying the cigar, and the one of the things I really like about this cigar is, and cigars that do this, is that it builds in intensity as it goes.
Yeah.
So you don't get the full experience until you get to about the middle part of the cigar. And I'm in the last third now. And it's just got this sort of huge earthy cocoa, cedar, a little bit of spice, like the. Again, it's so funny to me because you and I review so many cigars, and there's so many cigars in the market that just fade in that last third, and it's so disappointing. So it's really great when you come across a cigar where the sort of best character of that cigar is at the end, because to me, you've been smoking for an hour and a half on a cigar. It sucks to kind of have that experience ruined by a boring or average last third.
It's like when the end of a movie is bad. Like you can enjoy the entire movie, and if the end is bad, you walk out thinking that was a bad movie.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, absolutely. The denouement, as it were. I want my denouement to be complex and tasty. So yeah, there's no question to me, and this kind of remains to be true, that if you're a Habano smoker, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this, but like the kind of standard thing with Habanos is you smoke one, see what it tastes like, and then you set it down. And you set it down for 2 or 3 years, and then after about 2 or 3 years, the cigar kind of gets into its like good point. Yeah. And then after 5 to 8 years, the cigar kind of peaks. I tend not to find over the 8-year mark that I necessarily get anything great. I've had some Habanos. I've been gifted some Habanos that were, 15 years plus. I think the only exception to that was some RYJs from the early 2000s. And it was a rough time because there's some early 2000 Habanos that were just garbage. But the RYJs from early 2000 are just like buttercream in a cigar. But I think that like even there they've kind of peaked. So like if you sat on that box for another 5 years, it's really going to start to decline.
Yeah, I agree with that. They do tend, like we talk about this a lot too. Habanos do tend to age better than most Nicaraguan cigars because I feel like Nicaraguan and to some extent Dominican cigars, you're really it's more about the intensity of flavor.
Yeah.
And Habanos, it's more about the overall kind of elegance and refined flavors that you get.
And I mean, you think about the average Nicaraguan cigar. I mean, God, some of these cigars are coming out with like 5-year, 8-year, 15-year-old tobacco. Like that's just not, other than the Añejados program in Cuba, which hilariously or ironically is like to me the worst cigars they produce. They just don't have cigars that use that kind of aged tobacco. I mean, unfortunately, they're running their production is at sort of peak levels because the world consumption of Habanos is at its high level, and really they could double capacity overnight and they'd just sell twice as many cigars. Of course, the quality would be awful, but I'd love to see. I would love to see some of the masters of the Dominican Republic and Nicaragua go into a free Cuba and sort of evolve Cuban tobacco to the next level, and you start to get, Cuban tobacco with 3 or 4 year old aged wrapper or 5+ year old aged filler. And I think you could come out with some just magnificently amazing cigars. Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, the problem is for anybody who's not familiar with it, in Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic, they tend to, for the most part, most of the tobaccos that you're getting out of a cigar are going to be at least a year old because they've gone through curing and a fairly long fermentation and aging process. Like we've both been to Drew Estate. They age that broadleaf 2 to 3 years on average. In Cuba, most of that tobacco is shipped in a box within a year from being harvested. Yeah. And that's kind of why there's that weird dynamic, like a lot of people call it the sick period, where you're getting the fermentation basically happening in the box. When, like, in Nicaragua, like Casa Favili, for example, Mombacho ages everything for 6 months before it goes into a box.
Crazy Claudio.
Yeah, which is crazy. But in Cuba, they don't, as far as I know, they don't even really have aging rooms. They basically roll the cigars and stick them in a box, right?
Well, so they do for the Añejados program.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And they do for their secret warehouse that nobody's supposed to know about for all the cigars that they're prepared to drop on the American market should the embargo ever drop. They've essentially got a giant warehouse filled to the brim with cigars that they're ready to drop, $40 million, $50 million worth of cigar product on the
Wow.
American market. Should they? Now, no one's supposed to know that. It's kind of the big sort of open secret, but they're ready. Of course, after that, production would just come to a complete halt. But
yeah,
to me, like, because I know, and this is kind of one of the things I talk about, is that as a guy who kind of straddles both lines of the tobacco, I see so many Habano smokers who are like, I smoked a non-Cuban cigar one time and it was shit, so all non-Cuban cigars are bad. And you get the same thing, you see a lot of trash talk about Cuban tobacco. And to me, it's like food or anything else. It's like there's things that I seek out in Habanos tobacco, and there's things that I seek out in non-Cuban tobacco. It just so happens that, my palate gravitates towards non-Cuban cigars. And I think, 70-ish% of the cigars I smoke are non-Cuban. Yeah. So,
and
like you said,
you can't make the leap from one to the other without being educated about how it's going to be different, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you just smoke a random Nicaraguan cigar after only smoking Cubans for decades, there's no way you're not going to be disappointed because it's going to taste completely alien to what you're used to.
Yeah, it's like you're a bourbon drinker and all of a sudden you start drinking single malt and you're like, this doesn't taste anything like bourbon. It's like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't, because they're completely separate products. And on a personal note, I don't believe that Cuban cigars and non-Cuban cigars should ever be on a top list together. That's just me. Just throwing that out there. Casting a little shade, throwing a little shade out there.
I'm not against that opinion at all. I think it makes sense to have separate Cuban and non-Cuban lists for those who make lists. That
for those people out there that might be in the media market and make lists. I don't know any of them at all.
Yeah, me neither. I've never met somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
Evan Kirshner says that only bars can get Smoky Monkey. Yeah, but I've just never been to a bar that had it. As far as I know, at least, unless I've been to a bar that's just stashing it away somewhere.
We should seek it out in Vegas. We should make that like our mission statement to try and find Smoky Monkey.
That's a good idea. Mm-hmm. I like that idea.
Develop our palates, as it were.
Yeah, good idea. There was something else I was going to say, but now I've completely lost that thought. Oh, it was about the aging of the tobaccos. The only tobacco that I know of that's fermented for longer in Cuba is the Maduro wrappers that they use on I believe there's a Partagas Maduro now, right?
There is, yeah.
And I know the whole thing with the Cohiba Maduros that came out a few years ago was that they were 5-year fermented wrappers. But I mean, that's the only way they're getting them to the Maduro point.
Ironically, for me, the least Habanos and therefore the least enjoyable cigars for me, because it just it just so far moves out of the character of what like when I go to drink a whiskey from a particular distillery, I'm looking for this nature. So if I pick up a Glenfiddich and it's super smoky, I'm like, what is going on here? So when I pick up a Cuban cigar and it's a Maduro, I'm like, well, I smoke cigars from Nicaragua and they know how to make a really good Maduro. And so now you've moved into this market where you're competing against a non-Cuban Nicaraguan Maduro, which is phenomenal, and your cigar pales in comparison. So, I tend not to, and I think that's kind of a general consensus, actually. A lot of hardcore Habanos guys do not like Maduro Habanos at all.
That's the general sentiment that I've heard. I don't think I've ever had one, but I don't remember. I might have had the little Cohiba. I don't
even think in my entire Habanos collection I have a single. I think I have any of the Cohiba Maduros, and
what is your pairing of the night?
So no question, for me, the pairing of the night is tied. Got an official tie here between the Toki and the Havana Club. I think the Toki is kind of the right, I think a whiskey or a sort of really delicate bourbon single malt is kind of the way to go with this cigar, because it's not going to run over the character of the cigar. Rum, like you said, it's too easy. I mean, rum in general with cigars is too easy, but rum with Habano cigar, you might as well be pairing coffee, because you just can't find a bad pairing. These cigars are designed to be paired with rum. I just did it because, Habana Club, that's whatever. I think we firmly established that stay away from sherried whiskey.
Yes, absolutely.
It's too intense. What about you?
For me, surprisingly, the Eagle Rare. is the pairing of the night for me. I think that that's the one that just brings out the most character in the cigar.
Wow.
I think that a slightly less intense bourbon would probably be better, just because Eagle Rare is on the more intense side of bourbons.
Absolutely.
Even at only 95%.
But it's so full body in the flavor, right?
45%, 90 proof. Yeah, it's so full bodied on the flavor side. I think something like a Old Weller Antique is 107 proof, but to me it's much less aggressive than Eagle Rare.
Yeah, that's a good way.
And I think something like that would go way better with this.
Interesting. So there you go. So try some bourbon with your Habano cigars and right into the show and find something that's good.
Yeah. And John, I want to thank you for joining the show as co-host once again. Tell everybody where they can find you on Developing Palates.
Yeah, developingpalates.com. You can either find me on the cigar review section or the beer review section, and like I said, soon to come the spirit review section. We might have something new, so keep your eyes peeled. There might be something new coming in the next couple of weeks regarding the beer and spirit side of things. So keep your eyes peeled, or you can find me John at developingpalates.com. Of course, Cigar Surgeon. The Cigar Surgeon, the real Cigar Surgeon, anywhere on social media, Instagram, Twitter. I am out there. Feel free to contact me, email me, or ping me.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thank you, of course, to all of our podcast and Armed Forces Radio Network listeners out there. To our Armed Forces Radio Network listeners, we know you guys are out there doing things we're not built to do and protecting our freedoms, and we appreciate that. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to have Chris Topper from Topper Cigars. They make mostly machine-made cigars that are they've been around for I think 122 years now, 123. Woo! And they have, as far as I know, they've never released a cigar that did not have a Connecticut broadleaf wrapper, which is crazy.
Trippy. I forgot something very, very important.
What's that?
Today is June 6th, the Armistice Day for D-Day, 1944, the largest amphibious assault ever launched in the history of warfare in the world. So I just want to give a shout out to all the veterans of armed forces and, of course, anyone still living out there who was actually participating in D-Day because, out there fighting for freedoms, it was a very important day in our history. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I almost forgot. Or I guess I did forget, at least, as far as closing the show goes. So thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Sharing Our Pairings. And in just a couple weeks, we'll be at the IPCPR bringing you some live coverage, which will be fun. So everybody have a great and safe weekend, and we'll see you next week.